My mom dabbed her eyes and announced, "I used your savings for family bills. Be grateful." My brother nodded. My aunt sighed like I owed them. I smiled, too calm, and pulled out a ledger I'd been keeping since my first paycheck. I opened to one page, slid it to the center, and said, "Read the bills out loud." Nobody moved. "My name is Ava. I'm 29, and the savings my mom stole weren't extra money I could shrug off. They were the one thing I built that belonged only to me." I opened that account the week after college, after the first time I watched my family treat my paycheck like a communal bowl. Mom would forget her card at the grocery store. My brother Ryan would need gas money. And I'd pay, because I hated tension more than I loved boundaries. So I created a boundary that didn't require a fight, automatic transfers, a separate bank, and a quiet promise that one day I'd have enough for a down payment and a life that didn't depend on anyone's mood. The problem is, my mom has always been allergic to separate. To her, family means access, and access is her version of love. If you don't hand it over, you must not care. When Dad was alive, he buffered her impulses. But after he died, she turned my reliability into an obligation, calling me the responsible one, right before asking for something she didn't want to admit she couldn't afford. At first it sounded reasonable. "Can you cover the electric bill this month?" And then it got foggy on purpose. "I need help with family bills." I made the mistake of believing fog meant temporary, so I let her link my savings as an external account for transfers, telling myself it was safer than handing her cash and easier than arguing every time she cried. I also kept a ledger, because Dad taught me that numbers don't lie even when people do. Every withdrawal got a date, a note, and a category, and I cross-checked it against statements like a habit I didn't think I'd ever need. Then the bills started multiplying while the details disappeared. Amounts that didn't match utilities, timing that spiked around holidays, little stories that changed depending on who was listening. By the time she cornered me at that dinner and said she took my savings for family bills, the betrayal wasn't only the theft, it was the way everyone at the table acted like I was supposed to thank her for it. And when I watched my cousin's face drop for a split second at the phrase, "family bills," I realized this wasn't just Mom improvising. It was a script the family had been letting her run as long as I stayed quiet. I smiled anyway. Not because I forgave her, but because the moment I stopped pleading for fairness was the moment I could start proving the truth, and the last line I'd written in that ledger wasn't a utility or a mortgage at all. It was a transfer with a name I'd never seen before. The first red flag was so small I almost felt embarrassed for noticing it. A single transfer I didn't recognize, labeled like a utility payment but routed through a different processor than our local companies ever used. And when I asked Mom about it, she didn't answer the question, she answered my character. "Why are you checking like that?" she said, laughing too brightly. "You're starting to sound like your father, and you know how controlling that was." That was her move, always. Turn curiosity into cruelty, make you feel guilty for wanting clarity, then watch you back down so she could keep moving in the dark. I told myself it was grief, that she was overwhelmed, that families get messy after a loss, and I let it go. But the second red flag came with a pattern I couldn't unsee. The withdrawals weren't random, they had rhythm. They clustered around weekends, holidays, the exact weeks when Mom hosted dinners and insisted on traditions, and every time I asked what the bill was, the explanation shifted just enough to keep me off balance. One day it was the electric, the next it was the water, then it became repairs, then your brother needed help. And the moment I tried to pin it down, she'd sigh like I was exhausting her. "Do you want receipts?" she'd ask, offended. "Do you not trust your own mother?" That question is a trap, because if you say yes, you're cruel. If you say no, you're compliant. And I was raised to choose compliance and call it peace. Then Ryan started dropping comments that didn't match my reality, like he'd been briefed. "Mom says you've been weird about money," he said one night on the phone, casual as breathing. "Like you're hoarding." Hoarding was Mom's favorite word for anything I tried to keep for myself. I asked him what he meant, and he laughed. "I mean, we're family," he said. "It's not like that money is just yours." The way he said "just yours" made my stomach turn, because it revealed a belief that had been simmering under the surface the whole time. My savings weren't a boundary to them. They were a resource they hadn't accessed yet. The next red flag was the way Mom started fishing for access updates without admitting it. She'd call and ask, "Did you change banks?" Or, "Are you still using that app?" Or, "You should really make sure I can reach you if there's an emergency." And it always sounded like concern until you noticed she never asked about my actual emergencies, only the ones involving my money. When I tightened up and told her I was budgeting, she'd go quiet for a beat, then pivot into martyr mode. "I guess I'm just a burden now," she'd whisper, "after all I've done." And because guilt is the language she taught me before English, I'd find myself explaining my finances to her like I was asking permission to be an adult. I started logging everything more carefully after that, not because I wanted a fight, but because my body began to feel that low-grade dread every time my phone buzzed with a bank notification, like my money was being watched by someone else. A week before the dinner, I noticed a withdrawal that made my hands go cold. It wasn't a rounded bill amount, it was precise, like a purchase, and it hit at 11:38 p.m., which wasn't utilities, it was impulse. I called Mom the next day and asked calmly, "What was that charge?" She didn't deny it. She scolded me. "Ava," she snapped, "you are not going to interrogate me." Interrogate. The word was meant to shame me, but all it did was confirm she knew she was doing something wrong, because innocent people don't need to turn questions into crimes. Then she softened instantly, voice dripping sweetness like a reset button. "Honey, I told you," she said. "Family bills. Don't worry your pretty head." Pretty head, another little humiliation, another reminder that she preferred me small. That same night my cousin texted me out of nowhere. "Are you okay?" Just those 3 words. And when I asked why, she said, "Just checking." But the timing was too perfect to be random. It felt like someone had been talking about me, again, painting me as difficult so my boundaries would look like betrayal. By the time Christmas dinner arrived, the red flags weren't just financial anymore. They were social whispers, labels, side glances, the way Mom controlled the room with a smile and a sigh, the way Ryan acted like he already knew the verdict. And the strangest part was how calm Mom seemed for someone supposedly drowning in bills. Like she wasn't afraid of money at all, like she was afraid I might finally see where it was really going. Because the last entry in my ledger wasn't electric or mortgage or groceries. It was a transfer with a name I didn't recognize and a note I'd written in the margin that night, in shaking ink. "Who is this?" Mom chose the kind of family dinner where everything looks warm on the surface: candles, roasted chicken, the same old holiday playlist, because she understands optics better than anyone I know. And as soon as everyone sat down, she launched into her performance like the meal was just a backdrop. She dabbed the corner of her eye with a napkin, sighed dramatically, and said, "I didn't want to bring this up, but I'm under so much pressure." Then turned her head toward me like the camera had finally found its target. "Ava has been acting distant," she announced, letting the word hang like a moral failure, and Ryan immediately leaned in with that smug, practiced sympathy, the kind that says he already knows how the story ends. "Mom's been drowning in bills," he added, shaking his head like I was forcing her to suffer. And my aunt murmured something about how kids these days forget sacrifice, while my cousin stared hard at her plate like if she didn't look up, she wouldn't have to pick a side. I could feel the room being arranged around me, the way it always is when my mother wants leverage. First, she establishes herself as the exhausted hero, then she paints me as the ungrateful obstacle, and then she waits for someone else to say what she can't say without looking cruel. "I had to use your savings for family bills," Mom said finally, and she said it like a confession she deserved applause for, not like theft. "Real bills," she emphasized, leaning forward, voice turning stern, parental. "And before you make that face, remember this family kept you fed, clothed, safe. Don't be selfish." The word selfish hit the table like a fork dropped on porcelain, and it did exactly what she wanted. Everyone looked at me as if I'd done something wrong by existing with boundaries. Ryan nodded slowly, satisfied, then said, "Honestly, Ava, you've been hoarding money while Mom's trying to keep the lights on." Hoarding again, that favorite weaponized word, and I watched my mother's mouth twitch into a smile she tried to hide behind concern. I didn't argue, because arguing would have been the reaction she was waiting for. She would have pointed at my anger and called it proof. Instead, I smiled small, calm, almost polite, and that smile made Ryan's confidence flicker. Because calm is confusing when you're expecting someone to beg. If it was for bills, I said softly, then it should be easy to list them. Mom's eyes narrowed, and she laughed the way she laughs when she wants the room to laugh with her. "Oh my God," she said, turning to my aunt. "See? This is what I deal with." She interrogates me like I'm a criminal. Criminal, there it was, the projection. The attempt to make my question feel like an attack. "Because you're acting like one," Ryan muttered under his breath, and Mom's head snapped toward him like she wanted to scold him for saying the quiet part out loud, but she didn't, because the quiet part served her. She straightened her shoulders and switched into the voice she uses when she wants to sound reasonable. "Ava, I'm not going to sit here and be humiliated," she said, as if I were the one who stole money. "But I will say this. If you keep making trouble, you're going to force me to protect myself." As if consequences were violence, and accountability was cruelty, my uncle cleared his throat and added, "Families share burdens," and my aunt chimed in, "Your mother wouldn't take it unless she needed it," and I felt the familiar twist in my stomach, not because I believed them, but because I recognized the mechanism. Everyone was defending her so they wouldn't have to admit they'd been complicit in letting her use me. Mom leaned closer, lowering her voice into something intimate and sharp, meant to sting without sounding like a threat to anyone else. "You think you're better than us because you have a little savings account?" she whispered, and then she smiled brightly again and said to the whole table, "Ava has always been so controlling with money. She gets that from her father." She said my father like it was a flaw, like his caution was the reason she couldn't do whatever she wanted. Then she tilted her head and delivered the line that was meant to end the conversation. "If you don't like how I handled it," she said sweetly, "you can move out of the family. You can do life alone." The room went quiet in that uncomfortable way where nobody challenges the threat because it's wrapped in a smile, and Ryan watched me like he was waiting for me to fold. I took a slow sip of water, set the glass down carefully, and reached into my bag without breaking eye contact. Because the moment I reached, Mom's posture changed just slightly, like she knew what I was about to pull out. "What are you doing?" she asked, still smiling, but the smile was stretched thin now. I placed the worn ledger on the table with a soft thud, the sound small but final, and I watched my cousin's eyes widen for half a second before she looked away. "Perfect," I said gently, flipping the cover open as if I were opening a cookbook, "because I wrote down every bill you ever asked me to cover." Ryan scoffed, trying to laugh it off, but his voice came out wrong. "You're keeping a ledger?" he said, like it was insane to track stolen money, and Mom's hand twitched toward the book before she caught herself. "Ava," she warned, voice turning low and dangerous. "Don't do this." I kept smiling as I turned to the page with the unfamiliar name at the bottom, slid my finger under the line, and looked up at her. "Then tell me," I said softly. "Why? Family bills includes a transfer to someone you've never mentioned." I kept my finger under the line like a bookmark in a story my mother didn't want anyone to finish. Then I read it out loud, slow enough for every syllable to land. December 3rd, $1,200, transfer. D. Rain's note. Urgent family bill. The second that name hit the air, the table changed temperature. Forks paused mid-clink. The music in the background suddenly sounded too cheerful, and my mother's smile stiffened as if it had been stapled to her face. "Who is D. Rains?" I asked, still calm, still smiling. Because calm makes guilty people scramble. Mom let out a laugh that was one note too high. "Ava, honey," she said, voice dripping sweetness. "You're being dramatic." It's the electric company." Ryan snorted like he was backing her up, but even he looked uncertain, because the electric company doesn't have a first initial and a last name. I didn't argue. I just slid my finger to the line above it and read again. November 18th, $640 ATM withdrawal note. Water bill. Then the next. November 19th, $640. ATM withdrawal note. Water bill second notice. 2 identical water bills in 2 days, I said softly. In cash. My aunt's eyes flicked to my mother's face. My uncle cleared his throat like he could cough away math. Mom's cheeks flushed, but she kept the smile. Because that's what she does when she's cornered, she performs harder. You don't understand how bills work, she snapped, then caught herself and softened instantly. Palms open like she was pleading with a stubborn child. Sometimes you have to pull cash. Sometimes people don't take cards. Utilities take cards, I said, and Ryan's knee started bouncing under the table like his body was trying to outrun the truth. I turned another page, not fast, not angry, just steady, and the room leaned in without meaning to, because everyone suddenly wanted to know if they'd been fooled too. October 29th, $389. Evelyn A. Aesthetics note. Groceries. My cousin's mouth dropped open for half a second before she clamped it shut. Someone made a small, involuntary sound, half laugh, half gasp, and then silence swallowed it. Mom's smile cracked. That's not, she began, and I kept going. Because the only way to stop a manipulator is to stop letting them reset the conversation. October 30th, $389. Evelyn Aesthetics note. Groceries extra. I looked directly at Ryan. Are groceries a spa membership now? Ryan's face reddened. Why are you doing this? He snapped, but his voice didn't sound righteous anymore. It sounded scared. Mom's chair scraped slightly as she shifted, and I saw her hand twitch toward the ledger like she wanted to snatch it. Then she stopped because taking it would look like guilt. Ava, she hissed, low and tight. Stop humiliating me. The word humiliating almost made me laugh, because she'd been humiliating me for years and calling it parenting. I'm not humiliating you, I said, still gentle. I'm translating. Then I turned to the page I'd marked with a small sticky tab and read the one line that made the air go completely still. September 12th, $2,500 wire transfer. D. Rain's note. Family emergency. Don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone. That wasn't my note. That was hers. I'd copied it exactly from the memo field on the transfer, because that's the thing about ledgers. They don't just track money, they track lies. My aunt whispered, "Don't tell anyone?" Like the words tasted wrong. Mom's eyes flashed and her voice turned sharp, mean, real. "Give me that," she said, reaching across the table. Ryan moved too, like instinct, like a trained reflex. I pulled the ledger back before their fingers could touch it and kept my smile in place, because I wanted everyone to see who lunged first. "No," I said. "Answer the question." Mom's chest rose and fell fast, and for a moment she looked like she might actually explode. But then she did what she always does when facts corner her. She tried to make the room hate me more than they questioned her. "So what?" she snapped, loud enough to reclaim the table. "I took money. I had to. You think keeping the family afloat is free?" "This wasn't the family," I said quietly, and I flipped the ledger around so the table could see the column I'd labeled totals, because numbers hit harder when everyone can read them. "Over 6 months, you took $18,740, I said, and my uncle's face went gray. "That's not bills. That's a second life." Mom's lips parted, then pressed together, and Ryan blurted, "We needed it." Like that explained everything. "Who is he?" my cousin said suddenly, voice shaking, and every head turned, because she'd finally spoken the question everyone was thinking but was too polite or too afraid to ask. Mom's eyes darted, trapped, and that was when I opened to the very last page where I'd taped a printed bank statement behind the ledger cover, slid it out like a blade, and said, softly, "I already confirmed the recipient's full name with the bank. Mom? So don't lie now, because the next call I make won't be to you." Mom's eyes snapped to the statement like it was a weapon pointed at her throat. And for a second her mask slipped so completely, I saw pure calculation underneath: how to spin, how to cry, how to blame, how to survive, and then she lunged for it anyway. Because panic makes people forget optics. I pulled it back and stood, slow and steady, not because I was trying to be dramatic, but because I wanted every person at that table to understand this was no longer a conversation my mother could control with tone. "Sit down," Mom hissed, voice low and sharp, and Ryan pushed his chair back like he might stand too, like the two of them could physically crowd me into silence. I kept my smile small and calm. No, I said, and the single syllable landed heavier than shouting. Then I did the first thing in my plan. I created a clean record. I held up my phone, hit record in plain view, and said, "I'm recording this for clarity." Mom's face contorted. "You're insane," she snapped, and my aunt gasped like recording was the crime, not theft. "If you're telling the truth," I said softly, "you won't mind." Step 2 was control of access. While everyone watched me, I opened my banking app, changed passwords, turned on two-factor authentication, and removed external transfer permissions, and I did it with my hands visible so Mom couldn't later claim I was hiding anything. Ryan's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Protecting myself," I replied, and I looked directly at Mom when I said it, because I wanted her to taste the phrase she'd used on me. Mom's voice turned syrupy again, the way it does when she senses the room slipping away. "Ava, sweetheart," she began, reaching for my arm. "Please, let's not do something we can't take back." I stepped back. "You already did," I said, and then I moved to step 3, the one that makes excuses die, the bank's confirmation. I called the fraud department right there, put it on speaker, and gave them the case number I'd opened the moment I saw the pattern. The line rang once, twice, and when the representative answered, I kept my voice calm and businesslike. "Hi," I said. "I need to report unauthorized transfers and confirm recipient identity for multiple wires labeled as family bills. I have documentation." Mom's breath hitched, Ryan whispered. "Ava, stop." Like I was the one hurting the family, and my cousin's face tightened, as if she finally understood who the threat really was. The representative asked verification questions, and I answered them without looking at Mom, because eye contact is how she pulls you back into emotional obedience, and I wasn't going back. Then I asked the question I'd been saving. "Can you confirm the full name on the account receiving the transfers labeled D. Rains?" There was a pause, as the representative clicked through records, and in that pause, the room held its breath. "Yes," she said. "The recipient is Daniel Rains." I repeated it out loud, not for me, but for everyone else. "Daniel Rains," I said, and Mom's face went pale. Step 3 completed. I'd taken the story from her mouth and put it in the bank's. I ended the call and looked around the table. "Now," I said softly, "we're going to do this the way Mom taught me to do chores, by finishing what we started." I opened my laptop on the counter, pulled up a spreadsheet I'd already built with dates, amounts, memos, and screenshots linked, and I turned it so the table could see. "These are the transfers," I said, scrolling slowly. "These are the cash withdrawals. These are the merchant charges." Then I clicked to the next tab, Comparisons, and showed the months where Mom said the electricity spiked, but the actual utility statements didn't. My uncle stared, blinking hard. My aunt whispered, "Oh my God." Ryan's face tightened, jaw working, because he was realizing the room wasn't judging me anymore, it was measuring them. Mom tried to pull the conversation back into feeling. "I did it for this family," she said, voice breaking, hands to her chest. "You don't know what it's like to be alone." "You weren't alone," I said, still calm. "You had me. You just wanted my money too." Then I delivered the last part of the plan, the part that closes the trap. The choice. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," I said. "I'm asking for repayment and truth." I looked at Mom. "You will tell everyone who Daniel Rains is," I said, "and you will sign a repayment agreement by Monday with a schedule, or I will file a formal fraud dispute and let the bank handle it." Ryan barked. "You can't do that to your own mother," and I turned my head slowly toward him. "She already did it to me," I said. Mom's eyes flashed with rage under the tears. "You're ruining my life," she hissed, and my smile finally faded, not into anger, into certainty. "No," I said. "I'm ending the part where you fund it with mine." And just as I thought she would break, Mom's voice dropped into a whisper that made the room freeze again. "If you do this," she said, eyes locked on mine, "your father's name is going to come up, and you won't like what people learn." Mom's threat about Dad's name was supposed to scare me back into silence, and for a second it almost worked. Not because I believed her, but because the room shifted the way it always shifts when she hints at a family secret. People lean away from truth like it's fire. Because fire burns everyone. Ryan seized the opening immediately, voice rising with new confidence. "See?" he said, pointing at me like I'd done something wrong just by holding a ledger. "This is why Mom had to handle things. Ava doesn't understand what she's stirring up." My aunt nodded, relieved, because a secret is easier than a scandal, and my uncle muttered, "Let's just calm down," as if calm could unsteal $18,740. Mom's eyes glistened, not with tears now but with calculation, and she leaned into the room's discomfort like a lever. "Your father wasn't perfect," she said softly, letting the sentence hang like a warning label. "And if you drag banks and paperwork into this, people will start asking questions about him too." She made it sound like she was protecting Dad, but the tone was punishment. "Behave or I'll poison your memory." I inhaled slowly, then smiled again. Because what she didn't realize was I'd already heard the bank confirm Daniel Rains on speaker. I'd already started a fraud case, and I'd already stopped being afraid of questions. "Ask them," I said quietly, and the shock on her face was immediate. "What?" Ryan snapped, thrown off. "Ask questions," I repeated, still calm. "Because I'm not the one who has to hide behind threats." Mom's eyes narrowed. "Ava," she warned. But I cut her off gently, the way you cut off someone trying to sell a lie. "You want to bring up Dad?" I said. "Okay, let's." I reached into my bag again, and the room tensed, like everyone expected another bomb. And they were right, but not the one my mother wanted. I pulled out a sealed envelope, slightly crumpled at the corners from being kept too long, and I held it up so everyone could see the handwriting on the front, my father's. My aunt's mouth parted. My cousin's eyes widened so fast, it was almost painful to watch. Ryan blinked, confused, and Mom went very still, because she recognized it instantly. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, voice suddenly thin. I didn't answer her. I answered the room. "Dad gave me this before he died," I said softly. "He told me not to open it unless Mom ever used family bills to pressure me." The silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It was focused. The kind of silence where everyone realizes they've been watching the wrong person for too long. Mom's hands trembled. "That's," she started. But the word died when I slid the envelope onto the table without opening it yet. Because I wanted them to see I wasn't making a show. I was presenting a pattern. "He knew," my cousin whispered, almost to herself, and Ryan's face flushed with anger he couldn't place. "This is manipulation," he snapped, but his voice didn't land the way it used to, because the ledger and the bank call had already rewired the room. I looked at Mom and said, "You threatened Dad's name like you own it." Then I looked at everyone else. "But he wrote his own words," I said. "He doesn't need her as a narrator." Mom lunged, not fully, but enough that her chair scraped and her hand twitched toward the envelope, and that movement was louder than any confession because it proved she was afraid of what was inside. "Don't," she hissed, and the hiss carried more truth than her tears ever had. I kept my voice soft. "If there's nothing to hide," I said, "you won't mind." Then I opened the envelope, unfolded the letter slowly, and read the first line out loud, because first lines decide who the room believes. "Ava, if you're reading this, it means your mother is using money to control you the way she tried to control me." Mom made a strangled sound. Ryan froze. My aunt's hand flew to her chest. I kept reading, not fast, because every sentence was a nail. "She will call it family bills because it sounds noble. It isn't. It's leverage." Another line. "If you see the name Daniel Rains, do not confront her alone. Document everything. Do not sign anything. Call the bank." My cousin whispered, "Oh my God," like the air had been punched out of her, and Mom's face drained of color so completely she looked older in seconds. Ryan stammered, "Who is Daniel Rains?" And Mom snapped, "Enough!" Too loud, too sharp, and that snap shattered whatever sympathy she'd been trying to build. I read the last line that made the room go dead quiet in a different way, the way it gets when the truth finally has nowhere to go. I never wanted you to carry this, but I can't protect you after I'm gone. Protect yourself, and don't let her make you feel guilty for it." I lowered the paper and looked at Mom, and for the first time she couldn't perform her way out, because Dad's handwriting had just outed her in front of everyone she'd recruited. Mom's eyes darted around the table, searching for someone to rescue her, but nobody moved. And that was the reversal. My mother had built her power on a room full of silent people, and the moment they weren't silent anymore, she had nothing. Ryan's voice cracked. "Mom," he whispered. "Tell me Daniel isn't." But Mom didn't answer him. She stood abruptly, knocked her chair back, and said, through clenched teeth, "If you do this, Ava, you lose your family." And I smiled, small and steady, because she still thought exile was her ultimate weapon, not realizing she'd already pushed me out the moment she stole from me and called it love. Mom expected the room to chase her, to beg her to sit back down, to soothe her rage the way we always had. But nobody moved, not even Ryan, and that was the first consequence she couldn't buy with guilt. The second consequence came from the bank. The fraud dispute didn't disappear because she called it family. It hardened into a case file with her numbers, her timestamps, her memos, and the name Daniel Rains tied to transfers she couldn't explain. She tried to backpedal, tried to reframe it as borrowing, tried to offer partial repayment if I promised to keep it quiet. But the letter changed everything. Once Dad's warning existed out loud, her stories stopped sounding like mistakes and started sounding like patterns. Ryan, who'd been loudest at the table, got quiet fast when he realized his loyalty had been purchased with gifts and edited versions of reality, and the relatives who'd called me selfish suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. The repayment agreement got signed anyway, because my attorney made it simple, unemotional, unavoidable, and every payment that hit my account felt less like money returning and more like a boundary being rebuilt, brick by brick. I didn't win a family argument. I reclaimed my adulthood. I moved my savings into an account no one could touch, locked my credit, and stopped answering calls that came with strings attached. The strange relief of it was this. Grief didn't feel heavier after I set the boundary. It felt cleaner, like I could finally miss my dad, without my mother using his absence as a weapon. And the moral I wish I'd learned sooner is painfully simple. If someone can only love you when they can access you, they don't want closeness, they want control. And the moment you stop paying for peace with your future, the room gets quiet enough for the truth to speak.